Griselda is a Netflix original series whose first season debuted in 2024. It is from the creative minds of Narcos and Narcos Mexico, starring Sofia Vergara. And for those who may not know, Griselda is depicting the life of Griselda Blanco, aka the Black Widow, aka the mother of cocaine, which was a deadly and violent drug trafficker in the Miami drug scene during the 1970s and 1980s. Pablo Escobar, which was the notoriously ruthless Colombian drug lord and head of the Medellin cartel, was quoted in the show's opening to say, quote, "The only man I was ever afraid of was a woman named Griselda Blanco," end quote. Here's the official synopsis for the show, and then we'll shout out the writers as we always do. Griselda is inspired by real events. This fictional dramatization shows Griselda Blanco's journey from Medellin, to becoming the godmother of Miami's drug empire. And as we like to do here on the Spun Today Podcast, let's shout out each and every one of the writers that put this series together, starting with Carlo Bernard. And now let's shout out the writers as we like to do here on the Spun Today Podcast, starting with Carlo Bernard, Ingrid Escajeda, Doug Miro, Eric Newman, Brina Koof, Turi Meyer, Gina Lucita Monreal, Casey Papas, Giovanna Sarkis, and Alfred Septien. Shout out to each and every one of the writers that put the Griselda series together. So the series essentially opens up with Griselda in Medellin, Colombia, where she's from. And she's the husband for this low-level drug dealer guy who has a brother that's in the drug game as well. Her husband is more of a hothead who's always making bad decisions and gets in over his head. The brother is more of the ruthless businessman type, and Griselda's husband fucks up and winds up owing his brother a shit ton of money. And the brother says that he would forgive his debt if he lets him bang his wife. And Griselda's husband, being the cuck fuck up that he was, allows it and convinces Griselda to do it for the family. Forces her into it, basically. She winds up doing it, aka doing the brother, and gets in a blow-up fight with her husband after the fact. The husband kind of dogs her, treats her like shit, and she's like, wait a second, I just did what I did for the quote-unquote for the family, instead of you just standing up to your brother, and on top of that, you're treating me like shit. And she winds up shooting her husband and killing him. She then winds up grabbing her 3 kids, which she had at the time, and fleeing Colombia and going to Miami to stay with a friend who was also within the drug game somehow. She was married to a drug dealer, but she got away from the life, went clean, and has a travel agency in Miami. She's the only person that she knew. She called her, asked her for help, and she took her in on a temporary basis, her and the kids. Was Carmen, played by Vanessa Fidelito, which is a dope actress. And by the way, circling back to Griselda Blanco, being played by Sofia Vergara, one of the biggest knocks on this series, at least that I heard when the series was announced initially, was that Sofia Vergara was going to play Griselda, because Sofia Vergara is a very attractive woman, and Griselda is anything but the real Griselda. So everybody was like, how the fuck is she gonna pull that off? It's gonna be a little weird. So they kind of uglified Sofia Vergara a little bit, but she still, even with that, still comes off as very attractive. And they definitely use that sexuality within the series to her advantage, and being able to get things done with certain men and so on and so forth. So just wanted to mention that as a quick aside. But long story short, her initial plan, at least what she tells Carmen she was there for, is to go clean. She's running away from her husband who beat her, quote unquote. She actually killed him. But she said that she was, running away from an abusive relationship, which was technically true, but also left out the fact that she killed the guy. And she left Colombia with 1 kilo, and she was going to just use that to sell it so she could buy a house for her and the kids, and then, start a business and live clean, similar to Carmen's situation. Carmen even wound up giving her a job until she got on her feet in her travel agency. And she actually hid the fact that she was going to try to sell the kilo on the side to make some money. And She very quickly winds up getting taken advantage of by different men that she tries to either sell it to, they take it from her, or they try to cut her out of deals. And the series depicts this constant struggle of her vying for her rightful place as this, drug dealer businesswoman in this very male-dominated world of drug dealing. And a smart thing that she does in the beginning is realizing that she can't just show up places by herself. She needs to have a bodyguard. She needs to look more than what she is. So when she finally gets a meeting with someone to sell her kilo to with the promise that she can get more, she recruits a dishwasher working at a diner that she was eating at because he was Colombian and spoke Spanish, and he was a taller guy. And she was like, listen, it's just for a day. I'll give you, I forget how much it was, $200, $500 or something like that, more than he was making, obviously washing dishes. And all you have to do is go with me, open the door for me of the car, and, I'll give you a gun, but you're not going to have to use it, just so you can watch my back and just look tough or something. He winds up agreeing, and of course, shit goes left. There's a shootout, and the dishwasher guy actually winds up saving her life right before she almost gets shot. And then he winds up staying as her bodyguard throughout most of the series. Then the brother of her ex-husband that she killed is looking for her to avenge. He pieces together what happened, from some eyewitness testimony and the fact that she disappeared along with her kids, and his brother turned up dead. He's searching for her, finds out that she's in Miami, and winds up going with his number one hitman, his sicario, and tracks her down and is literally strangling her to death in a motel room. And his bodyguard winds up pulling out a gun and shooting him in the head and saving her life. And he was a notorious hitman for this guy. His character name is Dario, played by Alberto. He winds up being Griselda's new number one head of security and kind of teaches Chucho, the dishwasher, the ropes. And he also winds up becoming the love interest of Griselda Blanco, and they wind up having a kid together. And now with him by her side, she winds up definitely getting respect and climbing the ranks. Still has a lot of enemies, that don't want her to take over, obviously, how that world is. There's a lot of infighting. And she winds up recruiting Cuban Marielitos, builds herself like a small army, because all the Colombians don't want to fuck with her because they're, part of other, drug crews that are already there and established. But the Cuban Marielitos, which was the term given to the Cubans that emigrated to the U.S., so it comes from the Mariel boat lift, which was a mass emigration of Cubans who traveled from Cuba's harbor to the United States between April 15th and October 31st in 1980. And the term Marielito was used to refer to those refugees in both Spanish and English. And her ruthlessness, plus having this small army by her side, she wound up taking over shit. All the while, psyching herself out and saying she's just doing it and for her kids and to give them a better life. And, they're growing up, obviously, with drug dealers and killings and illegal shit all around them, pretty much getting groomed into that same life. And then we go through the phase in the series where the typical, getting high on your own supply happens. And that's both literally on the drugs itself, but also just buying into your own shit. You're this all-powerful being and your own hype and bullshit. And all of that winds up doing her in. She winds up getting super paranoid, turning her back on friends like Carmen that were, there for her. She even started looking at Chucho sideways once investigations were ramping up against her, and the FBI and joint police task forces in the area began knowing who she was and locking people up and investigating her. She got super paranoid, thought that Chucho was a rat, wound up trying to get him killed, and which was actually a true story that you guys can look up the actual articles of from the Miami papers in that time. But she sent a hitman to kill Chucho, who was just driving down the street and had his 2 or 3 year old son in the backseat. And the guy that was shooting at him couldn't see the kid because, little kid just sees the backseat looking empty, shoots Chucho, doesn't get him, but kills his son. And then I think Chucho flees and winds up working with the cops to ultimately bring Griselda down and get her arrested. I think 2 of her kids in the series, if not 3, wind up dying as well. Just stupid shit like fights in clubs, and one was drug related, if I'm not mistaken. Dario, she turned her back on as well, wound up fleeing the country with their kid and going to stay with his mother. Griselda eventually tracked them down as well, wound up killing him and taking the son back. There was a dope character in the series that wound up kind of putting a wedge between her and Dario, because he was the head hitman for the other top drug dealer that Griselda essentially took over for, and then also went to work for Griselda. His name was Rivi, the character name, played by Martin Rodriguez. He was just a dope character. I like how he played that role. And overall, it was just a dope series. It was an interesting watch, especially if you were a fan of Narcos Mexico, all those Narcos series. This is definitely within that same vein. And there's some overlaps. Not much, but some overlaps with Fabio Ochoa is in this. And in real life, she winds up dying after going back to Colombia. And she winds up getting gunned down by a killer on a motorcycle in the middle of the street. But yeah, it was definitely a dope series. That is my little recap and review of Griselda. Check it out now, rather. Available and streaming on Netflix.